Welcome to the Polaris Connection, the podcast that lights the way for families of autistic and neurodivergent children. I am your host, Brad Broyles, and each week we will sit down with industry experts, therapists, teachers, and more to bring you the most current insight, support, and hope. Whether you're navigating a new diagnosis or just need a reminder that you are not alone, this is your place to learn, grow, and connect. We are dedicated in connecting neurodivergent paths with purpose. Let's take this journey together, one conversation at a time. Awesome. Joining us today is the one and only Aaron Kaczmarek, aka Mr. K, a principal with over 28 years of experience, a heart for students. Whether it's Superhero Day or Hawaiian Friday, he shows up for the kids in every way. He has led schools to top rankings, earned statewide awards. He was named a Minister of the Year by the Arizona Association of School Psychologists and believes that the greatest success comes from overcoming the greatest challenges. Let's welcome Aaron Kaczmarek, known as Mr. K. Aaron, thank you for joining us today.
How are you, Brad?
Well, doing great, and we're excited to have you here. Now, one thing I've learned is you have these crazy shirts, like the shirt that you have on today. You're known for wearing shirts. Where did that come up? How did that start, and why do you do it?
You know, it's interesting. Throughout my entire career and profession, it's always been more formal, and I'd wear shirts and ties, and I always had goofy ties, and my kids in the elementary and the public setting loved those. But when I would wear the shirt and tie here, I think it really approached our kids differently at Polaris, and they were a little bit more standoffish. It was so formal and professional, and I just didn't see the relatability with them. But I happened to have a goofy rubber ducky shirt, and I wore it, and it was like all of a sudden everybody lit up. Everybody's like, oh my gosh, I love that shirt. Where did you get that? And then I just started doing a polar bear shirt. I'm like, okay, Polaris Bears, going looking for the shirt. So I bought that. Once again, the kids gravitated. It just created an ease in a situation. Education's hard. And so when you go into a setting that you don't feel comfortable and approachable, those shirts, as silly as it sounds, provides that. So yeah, I have over 55 different themed shirts.
Wow.
And I love to ask the kids, what do you want me to buy? And then they'll tell me, like, Mr. Kaczmarek, did you get me my shirt yet? I'm like, all right, I'll find it. So I always scour every possible sell site, whether it's eBay, Amazon, Target, Costco, it doesn't matter, but it's got to be a themed shirt. So yes.
Well, and of your themed shirt, what shirt gets the most positive reactions?
Ooh, you know what? I have a Captain Crunch one that I'm going to wear this one. So that one is big. and Pokemon. So I bought 3 Pokemon that are set to be unveiled this year, and I'm super excited to wear them.
Wow.
So I think those will be the hits. But my Lego one I'm most known for because it's super bright.
Wow. Well, whoever thought that connecting with kiddos through shirts is effective?
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome, Aaron. You know, we're excited to have you. We know that you're a leader in education. Tell us what your current role is with Polaris Academy. What do you currently do?
Well, I was blessed. I really was blessed. I was blessed meeting Nathan and Darcy 10 years ago with their son that was autistic, Nathan. And he's really the catalyst to everything we've done. And then that blessing turned into meeting you, Brad, and Lloyd, and Jonathan, and all those individuals. And so what I do, what was your question again?
Well, just like, what do you do? Because I have you down here as the executive director of school operations. What does that look like to be the executive director of school operations for an autistic school? If you had to tell somebody what I do, what would that look like?
What it is, do we want to say chief of school operations or executive?
That too.
So what do? I do everything educational, whether it's down to the resources, the educational planning, the staffing, the hiring, the running of the building, the relationships with the kids, the measurements of student growth, both in behavioral and academics, attendance, procedures, protocols, attendance, and just creating a culture. One of the hardest things in education is creating that culture, because it can be very mundane, if you will. And one thing that it's been plagued with in years is just loss of staff and employment and kids. And so what I do is I really just make sure that it's an inviting environment that I can quantify the success rates. And that's what I've done my whole career. And finding what those measures are is my job.
Well, and we hear about teacher burnout, and I know our podcast is mostly focusing on autistic kiddos and how we work with these young learners. But let's talk real quick about staff. We hear about staff burnout a lot. We hear about teacher burnout. How do you create a good culture?
It's not as complex as you may think. Being present, just being present.
Tell me more about that. What does that mean, being present?
Being present means when you're here, a lot of people use the term open door, but the open door is only as good as the accessibility of the individual. And if the open door is open, but somebody's always in the seat, yeah, it's open, but you're not present. And making yourself accessible instead of having an open door and people entering you going to them. One of my favorite things is just being out with everybody. I'm a people person. I love being out in the morning. I love greeting the families. I love being with the teachers. I have an office. I never use it. I'm sitting in the middle of the hall, middle of the action. It's better to be present and approachable and there on a moment's notice, just checking on people. And so that I have found has created a culture where people are so used to administrators, superintendents, executives, that they go to them as opposed to just being present, being there, walking through a classroom, just being there and asking a question. Hey, how do I fix this television? Or how do I get this site to work? Or how come the computer, or a kid saying, I don't understand this question? Being accessible is hugely important. So that's how you do it. And so once people feel valued and that you're in it with them and not there to just micromanage them, if you will, and you're part of the solutions and you create creativity. That's the other thing is at Polaris, it's been amazing. We hire thinkers. We want our kids to be thinkers. We want our parents to be thinkers, and our teachers absolutely are thinkers. If you're going to look to me for the answer, I'm going to pose you back a question on how we solve that solution. You got to be part of it. So that creates a lot with teacher burnout. So many times we're given curriculum and assessments and tools and mandates, and we're just expected to deliver it like we're widgets. And we're not. We're human beings. We're creative. We're learners. We're artists. And so when you allow an individual to become an artist and a student, it creates a real purpose. And so that's how I combat it. And it's worked for me for my entire career.
So you're saying that creating a good culture is more of being with the staff, being with the teachers, rather than, hey, you come to me, let me come to you, let me be accessible by my presence within the school facility. That helps build a good, does that build more trust, or does it open the door for more criticism, or does it create more opportunity for growth?
Well, as an administrator, principal, whatever the title is that I am, it creates a sense of we're doing it together. And it's not a title. It's not, I'm here, you're here. It's here's where we're at and let's solve this together. It's unity. And really about being present creates trust. Yeah, I'd say absolutely it creates trust and vulnerability. As a leader, that's hard for a lot of people, being vulnerable, because you have to accept fault. You have to accept that sometimes I don't know. But that creates trust. And so within that trust, it really creates the synergy that allows staff to stay, even when the job is hard. This job is hard. There's no question about it. You have seen me on days that it's been rough, and you can see it on people's face. But when they see that on your face and know that you're doing it together, and when I see it on parents' face, I'm like, oh, when we're relatable, we're approachable, and being present with one another, it just really creates that synergy with the families and with the teachers and the kids. And the kids create that own synergy. I'm getting off topic, but it really is a beautiful thing.
Well, it is. And, I've had the luxury of seeing you in action, Aaron. We've been working close together for the last year or so. That is true. And I've noticed that you enjoy, I've noticed that there's leaders that sit in the office and dictate from an office setting, but you're definitely with the people. I would almost say that you're like a school administrator with the people. Does that make sense? Like
I'm a teacher. When people ask me what I do, I say I'm an educator. I don't say, titles are hard for me. Although I appreciate them and they're very cool. But at the end of the day, when people say, what do you do? I say two things. I say I'm an educator and I'm in the family business. And that's it. And that always opens the door.
Well, tell us how you got into education, Aaron. I know you're a very bright individual. You had a lot of opportunity in life. Why education? Why did you get into it?
I was a lost soul a long time ago in college. I struggled in school. I wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. I went to ASU. I'm very proud to say that I went there and I didn't do well. And I got put on academic probation and couldn't figure out how to be a student. And I went to a junior college because and then I had a professor, Dr. John Ohl. I'll never forget him. And I had him at MCC, Mesa Community College, and he connected to me. And I heard this term a long time ago, and he wasn't an educator, he was an edutainer. And as an edutainer, he brought me into the history and just the world cycles and the problems, and it was engagement, and it was he connected with all of the students, and it empowered me. And I remember seeing Dr. John Ohl at MCC, and I was like, I'm going to do education. I went into ASU saying, I'm going to go into law school, and I'm going to become, I'm going to get a business degree, and they just didn't connect with me. And microeconomics, macroeconomics, legal, all of those things. But Dr. John Ohl was the reason why I went into education.
Wow. And then how, you've said a few things, Aaron, the word connect and empowerment. How did you use that building into your career? So you got into education. How did you use that to build your career to where you're at today? You've been doing it for 28 years. Tell us a little bit more about how you built that connection with individuals, schools, as you progressed through your career.
Failure. Made a lot of mistakes.
Tell me more. Like, what's a failure that you had that comes to mind?
Well, I love teaching. I was very good at it. I loved being with the kids. I loved the relationships. I loved the family business aspect. I loved the connections, watching the kids. I still get wedding invitations to kids I had 15, 20 years ago. Families still reach out to me that I taught. Sometimes I would get their kids. You're getting old then. But, a lot of those things. But when I hit into administration, I did lead from the desk. I led from the office, and I evaluated and I scrutinized every teacher lesson plan, artifact, left feedback, and I made a lot of mistakes. And How
old were you when you were in your first administrative job?
What was I? 27.
Okay. What was your role?
I was principal.
Okay.
Assistant principal. Yeah.
What age group?
My very first was at Patterson and Emerson Elementary, two very different schools, and I was an assistant principal. And that's because...
In Mesa, Arizona, right?
Mesa, Arizona,
okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And then a very esteemed colleague told the principal that was over me, he says, you're a leader. You need to go into administration. I love teaching. I would have taught forever, but he says, you need to be in the front of these campuses and these families. And then I did junior high. And I did that for a while, and then I had my very first elementary school at Stevenson Elementary, and it was a Title I school, 90% free and reduced lunch, 95% mobility, 80% ELL learners, and it was a great experience. I loved the community, but like I said, I made a lot of mistakes. In my first year, I led from the office, and I lost 22 teachers. Wow. And I realized real quick, I can't do it without others. And as soon as I allowed myself to be vulnerable, and losing 22 staff members, when you lose staff, you can no longer make forward momentum. It really is critical to address individual strengths and know a way how to lead to growth.
Well, and what you said, when you're in the education business, teachers are probably the number one asset that you have. Would you? Yes. And so from losing those 22 staff, what changed your paradigm? What changed your mindset of like, I need to be with them? How did you find that as the connecting point?
like I said, when you had to rehire, and I made that mistake a couple of years, and I just realized there was no forward momentum. And education is competitive. You know, you have a lot of accountability, whether it's the states, whether it's scores, it's the families, it's the students, it's the profession. There were so many things. And so one thing I would say, I talked to my cousin in Chicago just the other day, and he goes, wow, Aaron, you're super open-minded and reflective. I'm very vulnerable. And that's just something that I am. I'm okay not knowing everything. And I'll tell you, I don't have that answer. I always live by the motto, under promise and over deliver. I don't want to sell you something that you don't need. So I'd much rather say, you know, even if I can get you the answer tomorrow, I'd much rather say, hey, I'll get to you next week and then deliver tomorrow if I can. But if I can't deliver tomorrow and I overpromised, you lose trust and vulnerability. So I'd much rather get it right as best as I can. And then when I get it wrong, own it.
You know, it's one thing that you said, you know, when you're starting out in life, you're a young 27-year-old. There's something about in the 20s that when you don't know everything, you act like you know everything. But then when you get older, you know, in your 40s, in your 50s, you're more open because you don't know everything. And that's when you start learning everything. Does that about, you know, I wonder why in human nature do we feel like that we need to be closed off to show that we know stuff? Isn't that interesting? Especially with educators. You think educators would be more open. But do you find
vulnerability?
That vulnerability, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I like the self-reflecting. That's really neat. So what is it about? So you know, we talked about staff, we talked about culture, which is very, very important. But the main reason why we do this has got to be with the young learners that we work with. What is it? Why are you so passionate? I see. It you know, not everybody gets to see you like I do. I see you when kids are dropped off, when they leave. There's such a glow in your eyes when you find these kids. What is it about these young learners that you're so passionate about?
They make me laugh all the time. I get paid to laugh. I always, you know, I'm a family man. You know, I always say that I'm an educator, but my job is to play. I get to play. I get to play with Legos. I get to play dodgeball. I get to play kickball. Not as good as I used to be, but you know what? I get to just go play and do lily pads out in the playground. I get to be goofy. I don't have to take life quite so seriously. I literally get paid to play. And so the kids, you know, and they'll show you in the discovery and the glow in their eyes. I mean, I just love seeing them. And I also like to see the struggles and the overcomes and the successes, you know, how the perseverance is so important. So you get to see that vulnerability, both from a parent viewpoint, from an educator, and it's made me a better family man myself with my own family on how you have to be vulnerable. And my children have picked up on those same traits from me and my wife on how to just be vulnerable and own it when you don't know it. And you don't have to be perfect. And so the kids make it very aware, and they're just so comfortable with not knowing, and kids just ask. But as I grew older, I won't say others, but you know, you just felt like you had to know everything, and I had to be perfect, and I had this degree, and I was in this position of authority, and here we go. And it's like, you know, it's kind of like being in the ocean. If you fight the wave, it's gonna slam you to the ground. But if you just kind of ebb and flow and go with it, it's much more therapeutic, if you will, and then you really get
and what I like too, Aaron, is that you, because of your playfulness, I see you're able to connect with the kids more. The kids are more open. Our young learners are more. Seems like they're more trusting to their administrators, to where they don't feel like it was kind of like the tie. I think that's a really cool example. Is that tie just kind of gave out an authoritative figure to where your shirts says, hey, I'm ready to play with you and learn together. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed that. Now, with the, you know, we've heard sometimes that parents have a hard time or not knowing how to work with school administrators. You know, I have my wife, we have 6 kids. We go to multiple schools. I've heard that, you know I'm not the only one, that sometimes school administrators are a little bit tricky to work with. So What would be your advice, Aaron? How is the best way for parents to work with their school administrators? Again, if they're in the autistic community or not, what is some good advice that you would give parents about how the best way to work with school administrators or seek out the best of school administrators?
I say the same thing: open-mindedness, vulnerability, ask the questions. But I've seen.
Are you telling the parents to be vulnerable and be open-minded?
Absolutely. I mean,
well, how would that look?
If there's a challenge, be willing to hear both sides. To hear where those angles are coming from, and be aware of what's being said. But I also understand that as a parent, me being an educator, I always say I'm dealing with your most prized assets, your children, and money, and your tax dollars. And so it really is that connection. But I know it's as a parent. I would say be open, but I'd also say as a parent, if it doesn't feel right, trust your instincts. And I have met some colleagues that I'd be like, ooh, that they're very authoritative, and trust your instincts as a parent. If it doesn't feel right, trust it. But be open first, because once you start, the beautiful thing of Arizona is choice. We have so much choice, and we have so much autonomy as a parent that the dollars follow the kid, which it should. But sometimes, just like in athletics, once you start skipping teams and skipping schools, it hurts the kid. And so that's where the vulnerability is. Do your homework, meet with the administrator, make sure the views connect, make sure the school is a good alignment, that the belief systems are in alignment. And then once that's there, allow it to go through its growth process. Just like, athletics. My boys always stayed with one team, but I always did my homework. And I've worked with families a lot. My last school was amazing. I had amazing parents, and they did their homework, and they met with administrators, and they toured the campus, and they wanted to see the kids and the interaction. They wanted to see how I interacted with the kids. They wanted to see how the teachers interact. They wanted to see the layout of the classroom. What was the format? I'd say as a parent to do that, and then once it gets there, it's just rough. We're in the people business. And so,
well, let's kind of go back to that. I think you made a really good point there, and I just want to dive a little deeper in. So if I'm a parent and I have options to go, so Arizona is a little bit unique to most other states. Other states, you're in the school district that you're in, and that's the school that you go to. Arizona is an open enrollment state. Basically, we can put our kiddo in any kind of public or charter school. Private school's a little bit different, but we have that option to do so. So if I'm a parent with options, what should I be looking for in a school? What would be the top 5 things that, yes, we want good personalities, but I've seen where good personalities have failed execution. So what would be the top 5, I guess, I don't know how to say it, like things I should be looking for as a parent when I'm trying to choose a good school for my kids?
I like how you said the top 5, because there's not one thing, and I think that's really for a family to decide what those important things are. Does that make sense? I mean, Every family has, we're human beings. We're not widgets, as I said earlier, and every family has a different set of things that they need for their family structure, and that's not for a school. That's not for anybody to decide, but the home. The home that should be the place where it's decided. For me, it's education. For Aaron Kaczmarek, it is education. I want my kids to be thinkers. I want them to be problem solvers. I want them to be around a culture that allows creativity. But I want perseverance. I want people to hold them accountable. I want structure. I just want them to persevere. I want them to be challenged. But then I want them to be pushed beyond their level of comfort. But then once they've received that and then they've gone beyond that, then we rebuild them so we can continue. It's kind of like building muscle. You want to break it down so you can build it back so it can be bigger, better, faster, stronger. It's all about foundations. So every family has to identify what those key things are.
Okay. Well, good. And like you said, it always starts at the home, right? It always starts in the home. Parents are the best educators.
They are.
They are. So let's shift a little bit, Aaron. Like we talked a lot about culture, schools, how to work with an administrator, how to work with staff. Let's talk a little bit about Polaris Academy. You've had 28 years of experience. It sounds like you have multiple stories about how you got where you're at. Let's talk a little bit about Polaris Academy. So, first of all, before Polaris, where were you working?
So, as you said, I was in Mesa. I had a long journey, as a teacher. I was upper grade. I always liked the older kids. The littles are cute. Love them all, love the hugs and the songs. My wife one day made me do substitute in a kindergarten classroom, and yes, it was cute, but yeah, I'm not a singer. I like music. I'm not singing to everybody. So I knew quickly I liked the teenage years. I liked that they had humor and you could be a little bit sarcastic and they're playful, but then they can problem solve. They were a little bit more independent. I always liked the older kids, anywhere from 10's a little rough, but 12 to 18. I just love their personalities on who they are. And so your question, I'm sorry, I kind of went.
So no, just before, because the way I understand it, Polaris Academy is a school for autistic and neurodivergent children. Did you come from an autistic background? Did you work with autistic kiddos before?
No, and that was the interesting thing. Nathan Palmer was a parent of mine for 10 years with Nathan. And so my education was more at public schools, and it was always standardized assessments, and it was always about student growth and performance in academics. So I had self-contained special ed programs. I had specific learning disability students, special ed teachers, my whole career, psychologists, counselors, OT, PT. I had students with autism throughout my entire career, but it was always through the lens of the parameters of public education and performance and IEP goals. Mm-hmm. So I was quite vulnerable. I was very successful. I think the Title I schools really showed me how to address not so much where a kid needed to be, but where they were at. And I really pride myself on knowing where they're at and showing growth. It's always about moving.
So tell our listeners, what's a Title I school?
Title I school is a school that is identified based on their free and reduced lunch. And so they get additional funding. And typically they're in alignment with Title I status, typically are lower performing schools in a traditional sense. So you have a lot more academic deficiencies. It can be language barriers, it can be academic barriers, it can be attendance barriers. And so I had to learn very quickly on how to plug those gaps of kids 2 to 3 grade levels below. And those.
So when you talk about plug the gaps, are you talking about how to connect with them, how to help them, come to school, or what does that mean, plug the gaps?
Everything. Academic deficiencies. Here,
Gotcha.
You're in 3rd grade. This is the standard. This is where you need to be. You're here. How do I get you from here to here?
Gotcha.
And so the first half of my life was, how do I close that gap? Which really prepared me for Polaris. The second half of my life was I was at a very involved, very family, and I shouldn't say that, they were both very family supported, but it was more of the enrichment, the accelerated, the higher academic. They really had those more whole-rounded experiences, and it was enrichment, it was gifted, and that was the second phase of my life. So I learned those enrichment and those thinking, and that really prepared me for Polaris, because... So
you had the background of a Tier 1 trying to get the lower performing up to the move that gap like you explained. Then you saw the higher tier, more performing students as well. So with that's a pretty unique background, Aaron.
Yeah, it always shocked people when I went from Title I, because I was very successful at it. I really did show growth. I really connected with my families, my communities, my kids, and I had tremendous success. And then when I went to a non-title school that was very kind of like the flagship of the district, and it was the highest performer, highest academics. It always like number 1 in the state of Arizona out of 1,400 schools. I mean, it was just different, whereas the other school I might have 10 kids in a gifted, talented program. This school I had 140,
Wow.
I mean, it was very different. And so I always just wanted to challenge myself. And that was one of the main reasons I did Polaris. I had done Title I. I've had a lot of success. I loved the families. I loved the community. I loved everything about it. Then I went to Lucentis. I loved the enrichment and the family structures and guidance. They were just different. One wasn't better than the other. I just loved them both. But I just needed a challenge. And it was either to go to the high school, that was an opportunity that was presented to me, or Polaris. But Polaris was so different than what I had done.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Polaris. How did you? So you mentioned Nathan Palmer. He's a co-founder of Polaris Academy. Can you tell us that dialogue? How'd you go from a high performing job? It sounds like it was pretty. I don't know.
It was
sounds
lucrative.
Like you were doing really well.
Yeah.
Now you're in a startup. So why would you make that change from working in a lucrative job to now a startup company that opened their doors in 2024? Why?
I just as I said, every family has to decide. It was always about perseverance and autonomy. And at those schools, I always had to navigate a lot of those things that were out of my control. And Nathan gave me an opportunity to be, you said a co-founder, but a founder of it. I got to be creative. I got the autonomy. Everything that I knew that teachers wanted, I was provided that opportunity. Everything that I had learned throughout my entire life, I got to put into action. And the answer always was, okay, but, it was never no. Even you, Brad, it's always about dialogue. It's always about connections and questions, and we can be vulnerable, and we can say no to each other, and we can grow. And so that was appealing. I thought I knew everything. It's always easier to sit in the back seat and say, hey, you should have turned right versus left. But it's very vulnerable to sit in that seat and say, okay, now what? When Nathan says, I trust you, okay, make a decision, Aaron. It's like, wow. I always made the decision, but I'd say, well, they said this, and now they is me, and it's Brad and it's Nathan, and it's like, okay, how do we solve this? And getting to see a different experience, both from the business and the more business side, but the educational side, I've really got to see and be creative and take what I thought was right that my career had showed me, and now I get to put it to practice. And it's beautiful to see it come together with the families and the kids and Polaris, the autonomy, what our students are able to do, how we've been able to create a synergy within a private school of autism. I was with my cousins this week, and they said, well, what makes you so different? And I said, a lot of times the autistic community, a lot of families have choice. You can go to this charter school or this private school, the parochial, non-parochial, highly academic, there's choice. And families within this autistic community, they don't have as many choices. It's like, it's very pigeonholed. You go here, or you have so few choices. And so a lot of them opt out for homeschooling because they just didn't feel they had a real viable choice. And we wanted Polaris to be that gold standard choice. We wanted it to be a place where parents wanted to, they just had the freedom and the choice. And that's what Polaris is it provides a real alternative choice of different ways of doing things. Whereas my kids and your kids and most families have that, like I can go to ALA or BASIS or Mesa Academy or Lucentis. I have open enrollment. I can go to parochial. I can go Gilbert Christian or Brophy, and I have all those choices. But an autistic family doesn't have that choice. Mm-hmm. It's so limited. And so the ESA founders, and then the creativity of you and Brad, me and Nathan, and the ability to bring that. I always love the model when you say, there's two types of people that open these schools: really well-meaning educators that are really passionate but have no way to meet the demands that are out there, and then really good business people that know how to deliver on the whole structure of the business side of it, and it can expand, but don't have that real passion. And what Polaris has done is it's really taken, I always say it's a four-legged stool, because Lloyd, you got to throw in there. We have this stool that really is not possible without all of those important aspects that allows us to meet as many possible students as possible responsibly. And it's really a special place.
Well, it is, and I've had the luxury of seeing you behind the scenes. Let me ask you this: when you were given the opportunity to start Polaris, again, you left a really good job. You started with a school with autistic kiddos, and the way I understand it, you had some background with autistic kids, but not a deep dive as other professionals like therapists and BCBAs and like that. What was the from an academic level or just a cultural level or from a just a student level, what was the starting foundation? So, not too many people get that opportunity to say, hey, here's a blank slate, start a school. Okay? Here's a canvas, paint a school. What was the pillars of success or the foundation that you had to come up with or you thought was very important that you started with Polaris?
Nathan Palmer. Nathan
Okay.
Palmer is a brilliant man. He really is. And although he's not formally trained in education, his education, he says he's just a dad, and I've worked with doctors and superintendents and state level all of these educators, and they've been amazing. But Nathan's perspective and his creativity, it's fun. I always say at play, like he'll come down and he'll just throw out a bunch of ideas. And so I can't take ownership of it. I love to just listen to him. And then it's my job for him to create the vision. And then I get to be the architect and I get to build it. And I get to say, okay, is this what you meant? And it's very fun to be a part of that synergy, to have somebody with that level of connection to this community of the autistic. So I can't take credit. I have to be very vulnerable. I have to listen. I have to be intuitive. I have to ask for leading questions, guiding questions. And that's been it. I mean, so I just constantly growing. You have to be vulnerable. I mean, what we are today, starting a year ago when this building was empty and we had furniture just coming in and we didn't even know if we'd be licensed and opening, and the calendars and the events and the Win Wednesdays and the STEM and all of the lessons learned, and then a Starlight Early Learning Center. As I heard, I retired miserably, but I love what I'm doing because it really has given me purpose and direction, and I love the people I'm with. We're all vulnerable. We're all going through it together, but I think Nathan was very strategic. And when he approached me and he said, "Hey, Aaron, what do you think about this?" And I'm like, "I have no formal training." And he goes, "I don't want you to have formal training." He goes, "Because that's sometimes the spinning, you're not going anywhere. It's like rocking in a chair. You're moving, but you're not going anywhere. You're just rocking back and forth." He wanted me to take that academic because that's what he wanted for his son. He wanted him to make those he wanted that perseverance for his son. And he said all of the families that he was surrounded with wanted those same academics. And sometimes we don't realize we're in a cycle of not really growth opportunities. And I was in that, and he wanted me to take that strict academic and blend the therapy and the academic. And I got to be an artist. I got to help be the architect of this vision that came from him. And I just get to apply it. And now I've lived it, and it's a beautiful thing.
So tell us more about the academic standards at Polaris Academy. How do you work with academic and meet these young learners at their level? Tell us more about that. How does that work?
Well, it's really simple. It goes back to my history. Early on, when you're working at a school with students with a number of variables, whether it's socioeconomics, free and reduced lunch, mobility, language, all of those things, sometimes it can be very defeating if you constantly get, I'm underperforming, I'm falls far below, I'm not reading on grade level, and it's very defeating. And I learned real quick with my staff, with my families, and with my kids is if you never celebrate growth and what we have accomplished instead of focusing on what we can't do, it's a miserable environment. And I learned real quick about growth. And at Lucentis, the higher performing, the very academic, it was the same principles. It wasn't about where we were at, it was about growth, it was about perseverance, it was about overcoming, it was about thinking, it was about critical. And those formulas apply whether it's Title I or non-title, whether it's affluent or not affluent, private versus, charter. It really, all human beings long for that. And so at Polaris, how we do the academics is it's all growth. We have to have a baseline. Society puts us in lanes. Here's your age, here's your grade level, here's the equivalency. And at Polaris, we're aware of that. We don't run from it. We don't pretend it doesn't exist, because I don't think that that's setting our families up for success in our kids, because at the end of the day, we all want our kids to go on and be successful. That's going to be our measure of Polaris, is how many of our students go on to trades or other higher living and become independent providers and citizens of this world. That's what we want to do. We want to create future positive citizen role models of this world, and that's the purpose. And so we don't run from where society says we should be, but we also show growth, and we celebrate those opportunities. And we do that based on grade level standard assessments. We did a deep dive, because this is our first year of that data, of looking at all the variables of math and ELA, attendance. We looked at parent surveys, anecdotal, quantitative. We looked at all this data, and we want to celebrate that. But we don't want it to make it in such a place where it's defeating. It's got to be about us moving forward, instead of you got to be here, and if you're not, it's failure. And I think that that's what happens a lot, in whether it's title, autistic, high performing, it doesn't really matter. It's got to be about those little celebrations.
So then, so more of like, if I had a kid that is supposed to be in the third grade, he's autistic, had a hard time with mathematics, and his mathematics skills are at a first grade level. How do you bridge that gap? What does Polaris do differently to help bridge that gap, to have this kiddo get to more of a third grade, maybe a fourth grade mathematic level?
Well, that goes back earlier. It's communication with the family, with the administrator, and the teacher. It's knowing that we're a village. I know that's an old one, but really we have to work together. We have to be very honest with what they can. We have to understand that it is just one assessment, but we do need to be aware of how we compare. It is what it is. I don't like it, but it's there, so you have to own it. And so then we just work together. The teachers, how does Polaris do it, is we created that autonomy. We have parents. Our parents are amazing at Polaris. They're very supportive. They're very encouraging. They're very collaborative. We come together. We really are a family here. And so how we do it is we just have to have those critical conversations of where do we want to be, what have we accomplished, and what are our next step. And that's the premise behind us of Empower. How do we identify what our students do well already? How do we navigate based on our weaknesses? What are our deficiencies? We can't run from our deficiencies, whether it's social interaction, whether it's stimming based on noise, whether it is academic 2 or 3 grade. We don't run from it. We don't hide from the numbers, because that's not a solution. And then we elevate. How do we make that movement? And the freedom that we have in Arizona, which I'm grateful for, is we can say, hey, you're below grade level, and there's not fear of repercussions for that. It's not like you got to get them up. We have that autonomy, and the teachers are amazing with these kids. I mean, you say you get to see me in action. I get to see my teachers in action. I get to see them interact with the kids. I could tell you stories all day of how they interact. And this building allows for that vulnerability for the parents, vulnerability for the kids, for the teachers, and for me. And that's why we didn't have any teachers leave us last year. In fact, we had more teachers wanting to come here because of the environment and the culture than we could. And you're very good, Brad. You let me overhire, but we know that we're in a growth thing. But yeah, it's an amazing culture, and we just have to. Now it's just the sustainability, and that's where it's important that I have a Brad and a Nathan to make sure that we have a lot of people depending on us. We have educators, we have families, we have kids, and we have work. I said to Nathan the other day, I said, holy cow, I have 100 years worth of work in front of me. We really do. I just don't seeing it, and in my contract, as Brad laughed, I was joking, he goes, when is my retirement day?
Forever. So yeah. we actually did that. So that is a true story. When we hired Aaron, we put in his contract his starting date, and his end date is forever.
So that's the worst part. So yeah, and it's been fun. And It's just super synergistic. But
Wow.
we're vulnerable, and we're it's hard. It's hard. And I'm not saying it's just hard what we do. And I really love my families, and having my autistic. Some of my parent events. It's funny because people always say, "Oh my gosh!" Like I told, "Oh, I run on autistic," and they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry." I'm like, "Wow, sorry. I love my job, and I love my kids and my families." And hearing the families talk at our parent events on how everybody wants to tell them how to do it, and sometimes, when you asked me, and I didn't say it, what I learned with these kids, and I didn't have the lens. I wasn't allowed to do it, and that was my problem, not public school's problem or any of that, but. When our kids go into crisis and they have a tantrum or a meltdown and everybody's looking at us and everybody's making judgments on that child and on that family, boy, it's a lonely place. And the most beautiful thing I love with these kids is they can go through it and they can have a hard time. They just let her rip, potato chip. And it goes, and it's like a switch, boom, and then they're fine. It's like nothing ever happened. And I had to learn through Rachel, my BCBA, it's like, that's an Aaron problem. You know what? They're okay. They're ready to move on. And I had to let it go. And in my other life, I held on to it. And sometimes we wanted to fix instead of embrace and navigate, and that's that whole empower, navigate, elevate. And it was such a aha moment of when we hit that crisis level, everybody wants to say, this is how you solve it. And it's actually quite easy. Just embrace them for that minute. And when they snap out of it, forgive and move on. And then it's about, okay, now we're elevating again. But right then and there, that crisis was a navigate. We had to figure out what was the trigger, what was the trauma, what created that emotional response, and not be judgmental and say we got to cure it here and now. It's a process, and it takes a lot of time. And that's going to be the exciting, the 100 years of work is when you and I are sitting here saying, out of 150 students that were at Polaris are in these professions and secondary education, that's going to be my measure of success.
Right.
A standardized assessment is important because that's what that's what the job market requires. There are some essential skills. That's our job, is to make sure that you as a family get that product. But then how we deliver on that is not what happens at Polaris, it's what happens after Polaris. And then that will be really the data that really shows, did we succeed? Did we live up to our promise? And I'm excited for that. And we're going to start getting that data in a few years.
Yeah, that is really exciting to see the growth. We've kind of like how Aaron explained it. I've been at the school many, many times. It is messy. It is sometimes a little bit chaotic. But like Aaron says, then they flip the switch and they're ready to learn. And our staff is prepared for that. And our staff is ready, to work with these young learners of like, okay, it's okay if they have a meltdown for a little bit. That's fine. And then we're patient with them. And then we get them and ready to, get them to the next step. What are some common questions that parents ask about Polaris with our academic? What if a parent comes to Polaris, what is different that they would see academically at Polaris than at maybe a public school or another school that might be down the road?
You know what? The parents, it's more about them belonging. It really is. I've had to learn. Academics has been my whole life. I'm very successful with academics and standards and common formative assessments and, breaking down the data. I still keep that accountability, but they just want to belong. And it's about the social interactions. Some of the highest quantifiable matters is what our parents said is the thing they're most proud of is how their students socially interact with others
But doesn't all schools have social interactions?
Yeah, but the students that I have grown up in the public setting, the autistic kids, were always on the outside looking in. And at Polaris, they're in the inside looking out. They're in the mess. They're in that social networking. And that's what makes Polaris so special is they interact. The parents are most proud of, they love the academic. Of course, they want them to read, write, math, but they want them to be able to socially interact with one another. And a lot of the times, our families here, some of their proudest moments at our parents' meetings is like, my kid's going to a birthday party. Oh my gosh, They had a sleepover. Oh my gosh, they got invited over to a friend's house. Oh my gosh, they talk about their friends. They had a girlfriend or boyfriend crush. Those simple things that socially we go through as parents that we're like, no girlfriends or boyfriends till you're 20, or until you can provide. But these kids a lot of the time don't get that experience because they're always just paired with the adults, and they never get that real social interaction with their peers. And that's one of the things that parents are most proud of and do. They're really less concerned about the academics, but we share that because we know that our true measure is the parents want them to be independent learners as they get older. When they're 18 and 22 is really when we know we've done our job here.
Wow. So we still have a long ways to go. We haven't finished yet. We're just barely started on this journey. I wanted to ask a question. When you got involved with Polaris Academy, when you made the shift from teaching in public school, now you're in a private school. One thing that Polaris Academy does is we blend therapy and academic into one curriculum, which I don't know where that's been done before. I believe it's very unique, very new. And then you had to work with, you being a school administrator, you had to work with a BCBA. Tell me if you can tell our audience, like, how was it your first time? What was your history with BCBAs in a public school setting, and how has that shifted in Polaris Academy?
Oh, it was rough. It was rough because BCBAs in a public setting are used, and they're not. Yeah, they just don't have them. In fact, the district I was at previously had 5, and they even got rid of all of them but 1. And so it was limited. The OT, the PT. Nathan always talked to me. I remember multiple conversations, and he's like, "Aaron, it's about blending them." And I wasn't ready to receive it. It's kind of like, how do you learn a foreign language? You have to be immersed into it. You have to go and live the language every day. You can go to a class, but that doesn't teach you anything. I had to be immersed into the BCBA world, the clinical world. I had to go to the clinics. And when, Nathan and my parents at Polaris have lived this. They've lived the clinic world, and then they go in this educational world. And there's always this disconnect. And in public schools, I always just understood the public school side. And then now that I've had the privilege of working with the BCBAs and the clinics, now I see the problem or the opportunity. The opportunity is that because of the funding sources and all of those challenges, they really are separate worlds. And what we've been able to create is now behaviors. It's silly. You hear it all the time. And, behavior is a form of communication. And we tried that. This is not new. We tried this in public education. None of this is really novel. They're just different labels for each thing of pairing as opposed to bonding with the kids and common, data sources. But it really is such a nuance of getting the two of them working together and understanding how amazing these kids are, but also how convincing they are. These kids know how to get out of doing work. And they know what they're doing. And the ABA, the BCBAs, and their ability to be very data-driven and clinical, you just couldn't do that in public schools because it was all academic. And you couldn't exert that amount of energy, resources, data collection on those behaviors to help a kid navigate through those, because the kids have learned and they're just programmed that way on how to adapt. And getting the behavioral aspect to really support the academic, although it makes sense. Public school, I want to do the same thing. I just did it a different way, but I didn't have the resources and the data tracking and the knowledge. I mean, the BCBA knowledge of the behaviors and the programming that goes into place. I got the academic, they have the behavioral, and getting that really, Polaris is about the academic. That's the target. But these kids can't do it because of the behaviors. And the ABA therapy and the BCBAs put in those plans to get them to be able to meet it. And it really is an amazing thing to work. And Rachel is one of the best. I mean, it took her a while. It took me a long while to learn her world. It took her a long while to learn our world. And we're just at a scratching point, and it's special. It's going to be even better this following year.
Well, and it's so in your previous district, you had 5. There was a couple tens of thousands of kids in that district.
60,000.
And 60,000. And how many BCBAs were around?
And at Polaris,
5?
I have 2 for 100 kids.
Wow.
And I have 17 RBTs tracking behaviors and identifying those behaviors. But that's real hard for the clinical world because a BCBA in a clinical world would never have a caseload of 52. So
would
so
go
when we
nuts.
talk to the clinics and these parents have these individuals, I always have to educate them on what our BCBAs are capable of doing. Yes, altruistically, it would be amazing, Brad, if I could hire, and have 10 BCBAs here. But our motto is a 1 to 5 in how we service those kids. And it's always about educating the clinics as well about, hey, listen, you have to understand my BCBA and my RBTs. Yes, although we're very, very fortunate to have them, we're not a clinic. And we don't have that 1-to-1 RBT and a BCBA only managing 8 kids. Our BCBA, Rachel manages 52 kids. In a clinic setting, it's 8 to 10.
Right.
So it's always having that connection and getting that alignment with the parents and the clinic and all these educators, because as a parent, it's really rough, and my parents have been amazing, but how does a parent navigate that? And that's one of the key things we're going to focus on this year, is you're hearing this from the clinic, you're hearing this from the school, and then you're in the middle trying to make sense of all this, and meanwhile, your kid's having difficulties at home as well, and it's like, it really is the blending, and that is what makes, there's so many things that make Polaris, but that's yet another thing of, we've truly blended those behaviors, knowing that when we put on those demands of non-preferred tasks, and it can be academic, that will create more behaviors, and then they just blow up, but then we're able to prepare for it, and Polaris allows the teachers, the parents, the kids, we don't send kids home. I mean, we occasionally, but I mean, it's gotta be extreme. But our kids really, and our parents, we really just have to work together.
Yeah. Well, and just to wrap up on, I know we have some BCBAs that are probably listening. When you say they're in charge of 50 kids, they probably just had a heart attack. And it's not that our BCBAs are not, like superwomen. I mean, I know they're wonderful, but we don't bill insurance. So they don't have to be, we don't follow the IEP system. What is it that we do? We don't do IEPs.
We do SCPs, Student Empowerment
what is that?
Plans.
Student Empowerment Plan. So we create our own student empowerment plan. We don't follow the insurance that we have. Aaron, or the state requirement insurance that other states do. So that kind of allows our BCBA to, have a little bit more freedom, and they can work with so many more kids. Aaron, we hate to wrap this up. I think I can talk to you for days. In fact, I know we do. I think our conversations go longer than they should. But as we wrap up, again, I appreciate your time, a wealth of knowledge. It's incredible to listen to you and your experience and what you bring to the table. I'd like to ask one final question, and really just kind of going back to the parents. It's about the kids, it's about the parents, it's about the families. What would be your last advice that you would give our parents, or give a parent with autistic kids?
You need to come to Polaris. you need to come and do the tour and just see it, and it's an amazing place. So no, you're not alone. I'd say to a parent, you're not alone. There is a village, there is a community, there are a lot of resources. Do your homework and just be vulnerable.
Well, thank you. I think that's awesome. That's good advice. What we'll do for our listeners, we'll have your contact information posted on our page. So if anybody has any question for Aaron about how to work with a school administrator, what's the differentiator with Polaris Academy? How can academic be blended with therapy to help out with these kiddos? You're welcome. If that's okay, I'm sure that's okay, Aaron, 100%. To have them reach out to you. Okay, well, awesome. Well, thank you again, Aaron, for your time. Mr. K, I know next time we'll see you with a different shirt on. It's colorful and bright like always. And thank you so much for being with us today.
All right. Thank you, Brad.
All right. Thanks.